So I have Rez Nyanzi, who's the co-host of this show, one of the show, this experience and this process, which I'm calling a musical offering to Zim. So how's it going, Rez?
Yo, Mustafa, man, can't complain.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for having me and thinking about this great initiative. I'm good, man. How you doing?
not too bad, not too bad. It's like you said, you didn't believe I'll be up. It's 4 or 5 in the morning, but I think I'm on African time anyway, because by the time it's 8 o'clock in the US, I fall asleep. So yeah, but this is fun. So let's start off. Let's start off by talking about your art, and let's talk about it through. First of all, yeah, we want to talk about through the lens of our inspiration through Zim, where we're not copying what he does or trying to reinterpret it, but we're taking cues from him as activists and spiritualists. But before we do that, tell us about your different disciplines as an artist and a thinker. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, man. I think I find thinking through a lot of mediums quite important. You experience blockages within one space, and then you just find that you have an outlet in
Yeah,
another.
I know exactly what you
Yeah.
mean. Hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, man, traditionally I work as a photographer. I'm a film photographer, working between 35 mil and medium format. My thematics are kind of thinking through Black lives in the city, looking at how the city is set up, but also thinking through kind of ritualistic spaces and what that might mean for us, what it means to kind of have this very colonial tool in spaces that are so sacred and how I negotiate my presence there
Yeah, yeah.
as a way of storytelling, you know. Yeah, and apart from that, I make music. I'm a beat maker. I also work with ceramics. So I make sculpture and also I
Well, I didn't know
design.
you do beats too, man. You're a Renaissance man.
No, man, I'm crazy.
And also you're a
Yeah.
Renaissance man because also not only that, you're cerebral too, which goes against the grain of the artist. So you have both sides because you can write and analyze very well and do very conceptual PhD level stuff. Like the stuff that we talk about with music and stuff is going to another level. And most people who are visual artists or good with music and sound don't have that other side. But when you have both sides, it's very good. That's why I call you a Renaissance man. Continue. Sorry. Yeah.
Word. Thanks, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, and I think there's so many other things then, such as writing, that becomes a medium to think through and to unpack themes. Yeah, I could continue counting, but I suppose everything is really done with the core intention of kind of exploring and expressing myself, but also understanding the world that I live in and trying to see how my gifts can help unpack the stories of my community. So yeah, I orbit within those spaces, on and off.
Yeah, and that's interesting what you said about using a Western or European medium, which is photography, which is very invasive and entering spaces. Because I know from West Africa, where I come from, where they have voodoo and other forms of animism, which people have a negative connotation to the word voodoo, but it's actually just animistic practices, which you guys have from your part of the world. Also, where there are initiations and rites, and usually outsiders aren't supposed to come in. But one of the things I've been thinking is that, especially when you look at ethnography in anthropology, sometimes a European will come into a community, but a lot of those communities will say, no, now you're in our community, you're a part of the experience. So even that invasiveness is not an outside thing, it's part of the experience, and we're going to assimilate you into this experience and also check you when you're wrong, but it becomes a whole holistic. And I think that's one of the things we know about African spirituality is that there are actually no boundaries. So if you feel that you're using a European thing, which is invasive, no, what you've done is these type of forces have always been within African communities where there's some type of tension, and you're part of the process. But the question is, if you're behind the camera, what is your intention? That's the main thing. So what do you think? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think I suppose it's very what we're talking about is very similar to what we're trying to unpack today with Zim,
Yeah.
because we also understand jazz music to kind of be this tool that utilizes very classical instruments,
Yeah.
instruments kind of connotated with a different kind of music. But I guess the conversation becomes this thing of how do Black people kind of develop their own grammar? And I guess this is what
Yeah.
Zim did with the
Yeah.
saxophone and the flute, in which the instrument started kind of reflecting his worldview. And it became less about classical music and more about Ngqawana, which is what he embodied.
Yeah.
And I suppose then with the photos and the photographs and also like the camera, it becomes a similar thing to say the intent becomes more important than the tool. So it's
Yeah.
not the tool in and of itself that is colonial. It might be a product of colonial kind of technologies, and they used it for their own advancements. But I
Yeah.
suppose the intent that I activate when I use the tool now is completely different. And I guess that's what makes it relevant.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. And like I would say that we don't want to go because we're artists, so we sometimes we don't actually know what our intent is. That's the difficult part about art is to figure out what are you trying to do. But what you have is you have an intuition too. But I think as long the intuition and the intent and the driving instinct all go as a holistic. What do you think? Yeah, yeah,
I feel you, man. I think I really marvel at what you're saying right now because I find it to be true. Intention kind of then creates this idea that it's premeditated, and
yeah,
within African art, there is always the space for the living dead to communicate. So sometimes it's not necessarily that you had a clear idea, but you
yeah.
were open enough for the idea to move clearly through you, you know? But
Yes,
I
yes,
do think that even there is like some form of an intention, which is
yes,
the intention to kind of hear, the intention to kind of be a truthful reflection of what you hear as much as possible. So you opening oneself up to that kind of working does require you to be very intentional still. But I guess what you are also alluding is that the work in and of itself, the manifestation is not purely from a place of intention, but it also delves into intuition, which
yeah.
makes sense thinking about improvisation and the kind of jazz space that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I want to go back because that idea that I have, it came from a painter, and she said, if you already know, or if you're a painter or a poet, an artist, and you already know the beginning and the end, then it's not art. You get my point. So there's a part of discovery. So it's part intention, and I think, for example, John Coltrane said that my intention, and we know it when you listen to Coltrane's music. I've never heard a funny phrase from him or a sad phrase. He has a certain intensity. And Coltrane said, my intention is to bring as much good as I can to the world. And he said, evil will never leave because evil is part of the universe, but my balance is the good part too. I love that view that he made because he didn't put down evil, but what he was saying is that I am an agent for good. But if you listen to his music, it's very urgent. Like other musicians, they may be funny. I'm not saying being funny is bad. It's actually good. I was like, damn, Coltrane, are you ever not serious? You know, he's like a very serious person. Whereas for maybe, for example, like for me, I like to take on a clown persona sometimes. So I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit of the devil and the clown. So I know that much as of an intention, but when I'm working on a poem or a story, once I say this is the way it becomes too rigid, then I can't move it around. It's no longer malleable. So I think there needs to be not that it needs to, but I think there's always a balance within that with the art. And like you said that you jump to different art forms because you hit a point. Like sometimes I'll write thousands of poems. I say, okay, now let me do something that's more exploring music, like things with what we're doing with Zim now, or whatever. Because once I stick to one part of my brain, that part just becomes rigid and unconnected to the whole forest. I'll call it the forest or the garden because that's where we are. Actually, human beings, anything on Earth that's biological is actually a plant and is part of an organic species. And the further we move away from that, the more rigid. So yeah, I see what you're saying. So the idea is that you have intentions, you're going to say you're going to do this. Oh, I'm going to be a great photographer. Next thing you know, you're going to be doing other things like you might be a jazz singer. I'm serious, not even, or a blues singer. You never know what we're unlocking with each other. And I think that's what we can learn from Zim because Zim clearly, they said Zimmo, he only started playing jazz when he was 21, but clearly for his life, he had been singing and doing musical traditions. But then maybe he only came to formal instrumentalization training. And it goes back to something you said in South Africa, which South Africans have music and they have everything. So that once they pick up an instrument, that instrument is not something technical to be learned. It's something to navigate what you already know. What do you think? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, man, I think what you're touching on is so profound. The idea of song not only being trapped in the manifestation of a song, but song being like a vibrational existence that allows you to tap into the greater song. And I think Zim was quite aware of this, because the way in which he challenged jazz music at first was that he gave it very Xhosa aesthetics, right? So
Yeah.
he understood that, yes, as a tradition, jazz has traveled back to Africa because we find
Yes.
that it starts here
That's the
as a
way I see it. Yeah.
yeah, and then it travels to the Americas,
Yeah.
and then it's like it almost becomes an embodied memory that the Americans live out. But then when
Yeah.
it comes back here, it kind of assumes an interesting kind of vocabulary, an interesting kind of grammar, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is what Zim introduces into the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, and
But I think
I hear
also,
that when go ahead,
huh?
very quickly. I hear that in South African house music. When I went to South Africa, I said, "This isn't house music. This is Brazilian. This is Congo. This is animistic music. But it's house music. But by the time it goes to the South African, because South Africans migrated if you go back long enough from Central Africa all the way down, and you can see it in the rhythm. That's why I always say South African has great rhythm, but Congo has unbelievable rhythm. But yeah, continue with what you said. I don't want to lose our place with what you were saying
Yeah,
before.
yeah. No, I feel you, man. I think at the end of the day, man, we're always like portals of the things that we have encountered. And within Zims music, you always got the sense of he grew up. When you find out that he was raised by his mother was a traditional healer, it makes sense within his music because you hear that there. You hear someone who
And
spent
he's
time.
closer, right? He's closer.
Yes, of course.
And I'm not trying to cause trouble here, but Xhosa seems to be more of a matriarchal system than Zulu. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I guess all the Nguni system, because the larger family that we all belong to is Nguni, right? Which would be the
Okay.
Zulus, the Xhosas, the Swatis, and the Ndebeles. And those
Okay.
societies, as much as they have patriarchal kind of attributes, there's a lot of matriarchal energy, more particularly within the shamanistic healing space. That in and
Yeah.
of itself, and the relationship with dreams is seen to be quite a feminine entity. And we see this even in how once people become initiated, even the way they dress takes on a feminine kind of energy. They wear
Yeah.
like formations. So
I've
this
had
tells
similar in my own personal transformation because I'm Yoruba. And one thing I've noticed throughout Africa, the cultural and social setup is actually matriarchal. That's the power of the system. And it goes back to like, even I was joking with my sister with African American. I say when an African American man is mad, even like Tyson, there's still a little bit of feminine. He's like, we express ourselves passionately. Whereas if it's a European guy, a German guy, I hate you. But if it's a black guy, so what you see within black cultures, even throughout, there may be ones which are a little bit more patriarchal. There is that expressiveness. And when you look at the art and culture, it moves more towards androgyny and things like that. Continue, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. I think what becomes interesting also in like considering the life of Zim is like really understanding that perhaps if the music as a formal thing came so late in his life, maybe that is not the intention of his practice. Maybe it's not about the music. And we start thinking about this much more critically when we realize that he had a school of thought that he was trying to introduce,
Yeah.
which is psychology, right? And from there, he understood that this was an official institution, and he went as far as buying a farm in Ilatsfontein, where young musicians would visit him and they would just play improvised music, right? There's a documentary on Vimeo that you will find where the space was actually vandalized. And they walk in there with Carl Shepard and kind of play all the broken instruments. So the pianos
Oh,
are broken,
wow.
are broken, but they work with that. And for me, I think that kind of suggests a notion that we might have missed in Zim's life, where the music becomes an entryway or a portal into something bigger. He had very big ideas, but the
Yeah.
music became a place that he could actually try and package them.
And
However, I think if you look at his life and the philosophy of his life, it kind of permeates to more than what we see from the traditional
yeah. And here's the
image.
thing, because I've seen videos of Zim. All I ever see is a guy with a saxophone in front of an engineering studio smoking cigarettes. But you don't know what's inside of his spirit. You get my point? Because he just looks like a regular guy. Like, oh, look at Zim. Because there's a video of him where he's with Ngqawana and they're in the engineering room trying to work things out. He's smoking a cigarette. I was like, wow, this is a bad cat, like the old jazz boys. But what you're saying is that his mind was very expansive. And you have some concrete stuff because when I listen to his music, I was like, no way, this guy is a spirit. I also feel the same thing about Coltrane, but this guy is a spirit who goes way beyond the clothes he's wearing. And what you did was you elucidated for me because now you mentioned the Zim, the Institute and everything. And like you said, breaking the shells and when they vandalized the place. And when I listened to that song at Buffalo, he's using all kinds of instruments, whistles and things on the street. It sounds chaotic. It sounds like a bunch of guys running down the street using whatever they can have to make music. And that was the first song I heard of it. Funny enough, I saw it on a show called Jacob's Cross. Remember Jacob's Cross? They used to come. That was like the show that I was like, so they used to play it all the time every week. And I was like, what the hell is this? And so I started doing research. I said, Zim. And to me, that's his most iconic song. But it's not his deepest song. He has all kinds of songs, like where you hear the women chanting and clapping, for a little, and you hear different things. So you say, wow, this guy's mind is super expansive. But yeah, continue. Thank you. But I want to thank you for bringing that attention to me, because I didn't know that he set up an institute and everything, that he was an activist. Can you speak more to that?
It was proper. And I think, I guess, there's so much to say about Zim, but I guess even if we were to look at the later part of his life, before he passed on, he recorded some music with a bassist by the name of Bar Phillips. I think Bar Phillips is from France, but he's from America.
Very quickly, is Bar Phillips the one that did Man, a Dying Father Figure? I'm just guessing.
Yeah,
I didn't know that, but once I heard that, I knew that was a European person playing, but it was beautiful. Continue. Sorry. Yeah.
So they have then like this collaborative project, which is not out in the world. I also heard it from Brazim's son. His son is still alive. He lives in Port Elizabeth. And
Oh,
I think
wow.
what was fascinating about that tape is that it was recorded on stage and it's fully improvised, right? And you get to see how Zim was thinking about music at the time that he departed. It wasn't so much so of a formality and trying to get people to sing along to his songs. This thing annoyed him. And he was trying to break free from the music that he had composed as he was starting to see it as a prison. To be like, if I play this music that already came to me once before, I don't grow. If you
No,
want to
no.
listen to music, you can go to my CDs, go to my vinyls. But I'm constantly being sent music. I'm constantly being sent vibrations. And within this moment, there's music that is true to this moment that we need to listen to, that is not based on the comfortability with what we know or what we perceive to know.
Yeah.
And when we think about this, alongside everything that Zim did, we really realize that the music was kind of a platform for him to break free from any kind of limitation, because
Yeah.
we stretch it outside of music. This is what race does. This is what gender does. This is what a lot of systems that are set up in the world does, is that they create spaces in which we exist, but then those spaces are limited to kind of rules, formations.
And I think that's what leads to war. It leads to war because once you create a small space like that, your brain can't contain it and it explodes. And that's what leads to violence, I think. But yeah, continue.
Word. So for me, it becomes a thing of how is Zim trying to explain a really spiritual revolution through things that he was trying to do in his music. And I mean,
Yeah.
I watched a lot of his interviews as well. There's a talk that he has with some elders, Tete Mbambisa and all of them. And even there, he's talking about the same idea of improvisation, right? To be like, he's fed up with playing music that he's played. He's moved beyond that. He's in this space where the music is kind of moving through him at such a rapid pace that he doesn't even have time to notate.
Yeah, but
There's no
here's the
time to
thing. He
write
must be
down.
but he's a genius. Here's why I say he's a genius, because that's where we all want to reach, but it takes years of formal training before we can do that. Like now, what we're doing now, there's no script. This show that we're doing now, there's no script. We just say, let's meet up and do this. But this is years of us, at least I can speak for you, years of me going to school, reading, listening to Coltrane, studying and everything. But now I'm breaking free. I'm like, no, there's no way we're going to script it. I'm not going to care about the beginning with the proper introduction. Let's just go. So it seemed like his brain must have been moving at a fast rate. He had like a lot of energy. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. And I guess if we think about the pace of spirit having to be translated through the mind and body, we realize what he was trying to communicate, that he was working from a place that is not bound by physical laws and physical rules. And this
Yeah.
becomes the fascinating thing when we go back to this whole idea of intuition, to say, perhaps if we were to question where we create from, we would get different answers, right? So if we were to look at Zim's catalog, look at the Zim's music and wonder, from where did the music come? Right? What was causing his body to short circuit in trying to translate what was going on in his
Yeah.
mind, more importantly, in his spirit? And where do we locate spirit within jazz music? When do we move beyond the technicalities of he was a good horn player to really understanding that this person was charting some unwarped spiritual paths, right?
Yeah.
The woman that you are speaking about in Epofolo, Bofolo is actually a folk song. It's a song sang in the village, right? And it sings about his hometown where he's from, Bofolo. And it's funny, it speaks about how Bofolo is a place known for madness. The people that go to Bofolo are mad people. And this is also influenced by the fact that that was one of the places that had the first psychiatric hospitals within the East. So now it becomes this connotation that if you are crazy, you are sent to this town because this town will be able to heal you. But
maybe
then
that's the best town you need to go to, though. The
man,
crazy
I'm
town.
like, I need to
The
spend some time
craziness
with
itself
Buffalo.
is the
If it'll
craziness
make
is
me
the
sound like
medicine.
Zim on
Yeah.
any level, that's
Yeah.
the place.
Yeah.
But then it becomes interesting how he takes this and really makes it a composition that is so compelling. And as you speak, man, he involves things that are not traditionally within the jazz fraternity music space. But if you're looking at ritualistic spaces where song lives, things like whistles, things like all of the other
Chains, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
that he includes exist in those spaces. So you really get an idea that the grappling with him was really trying to see how does he recreate what he feels within the ritual space, within the recorded space. And this becomes the fascinating thing, is that Zim literally tried to put us through the process of Ngqawana, right, which is a ritual space for traditional healers using modern conventions. And he successfully did that because you listen to his music and it's not jazz. I
Yeah,
don't think,
it's
yeah,
not.
Zim was not a jazz
But here's what
musician.
I would say. So his music isn't jazz, but some of his phrases have the jazz swing. But that doesn't matter because you know what? If you're a universal mind, jazz swing is just one iteration of the human mind. So you don't call. So the idea is that whatever he's doing collectively and on a whole is unbounded. But I will say it really goes closer to where he came from his hometown and his values, and he's involved. So my thing is that same thing with when you listen to even jazz. For Black Americans, jazz is an African music, but for Africans, jazz is half European, and I agree, it's a half European music because it's based off of pop music. But for the African American who has been transported away, that's their language. But the thing is that what they did is they took pop music and Western music and classical sonnets and bars. And eventually it led to what Coltrane did, where he broke totally free. And as soon as Coltrane broke free, the jazz magazine called his music anti-jazz. They said it's chaotic, it's rubbish. And I've noticed this, I'm not trying to be racial. Westerners, when they hear African music or free jazz, they hear chaos. I don't hear chaos. I hear patterns and sound and viscera. Can you expound on that for us, please? Yeah.
Yeah, man, I think I mean there's the great work done by the elder Kofi, right?
Yeah.
Which speaks about how Africa has a very different rhythmic approach to music in general.
Yeah, totally different.
How
It's very irregular, unsteady, and everything. But that's because the idea is that African philosophy is that the world is unstable, and the rhythm has to be the counteraction, which has to be a mirror of it. But yeah, you can continue. Sorry. Yeah,
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 man, absolutely. I mean, like one of the things that really happens there is that you get to understand the complexity of how the African mind kind of functions, in the
yeah.
fact that within polyrhythms, we are not keeping to a central time, but the moving
No,
parts of the song all have their own time,
yeah.
but they
But I would,
create a time that we can
I
all
would,
connect
I
with.
would. I'm not arguing with you, but I would agree with what you're saying. But I think there is a central gravity, though. But go on. Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. And I'm saying, I think that is what then is that the different times in their individuality create this gravity that you speak of. So it's
yeah,
like there is a joining point. But the fascinating thing is breaking free, because within European music, the thing that leads is the metronome. So there's this
yes.
idea time is kept through the metronome, and their time is kept through spirit. Like it's a whole different formation
It's
where
formation. Yeah,
I'm playing something going there, you're playing something going there, but within our spirit, we know where it connects, right?
yes,
And I
yes,
suppose then for someone who comes from that kind of mentality, it's easy for them, and the kind of mentality that is not familiar with polyrhythms, it's easy for them to dismiss what Africans do as not being music, right?
yeah.
Because it doesn't fall within an organized structure that is
But also,
easy to
can I add one
explain.
point? If you have a complex mind, then you can see the order. So I'm not, so what I'm trying to say is that maybe somebody from another tradition has a linear mind structure. Because when I listen to Coltrane and these guys, I can actually see the unity in their music, even with the chaos. But so my thing is that their minds aren't tuned into it. But yeah, continue. Yeah, sorry.
Man,
Yeah.
you're saying exactly what I'm saying. Because I think what I'm then saying is that it becomes an intellectual incapability for white people to know how to comprehend music that gestures so many different rhythms. Whereas
Yes.
for people like Zim, people like Coltrane, um, people like Louis Muhulu, we can talk about all the African greats that play jazz music. They come innately with that ability of
Yeah.
knowing how to break into several rhythms while pushing one rhythm.
Yeah.
And I
So
think,
here's another thing, very quickly.
sure,
With the black people back in the day, Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, they would meet and each one would play. And it's called collective improvisation. They'll play, but all of a sudden they're in disparate. But as they keep playing, after like about 10 or 20 seconds, they all are in sync. But there was no agreed upon central rhythm. They just go, but that, but that. But once you see it, after like 5 or 6 seconds, and I always hear black people in America who do jazz. I said, I don't know why, but once we start playing, after like about 20 seconds, we all in sync. That's what we're talking about there, because there's a spirit.
yeah,
Yeah. And also in West African music, I'm not sure about Xhosa or whatever, somebody continues playing a gong at irregular patterns and everybody else is doing their instruments, even though they have their lead drummer. I'm talking about West African music, but there's someone who beats a gong. boom. And he may do it irregularly, but after a while, with the gong and then the other people and everybody chanting, it all goes into one sort of unison, even though there's still chaos. And then there'll be moments of chaos again. Then there'll be recentering, then moments of chaos. Sorry, continue. This is the improvisation that we're doing right here. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
man.
Yeah,
And I guess, I mean, that then speaks to the larger culture of writing music or thinking through music within Africa, because it's like, if we're thinking about the women in the field, right, who are working in the scorching sun, and they start mumbling a improvisation of a line that might turn into a song. It's the other woman that she works with that kind of then respond. So this whole idea of a call and respond. But then the song is something that is formed communally. It's not something that a single individual arrives with.
yes,
The
yes,
parts arrive two different individuals at different times. And I
yeah,
think this is the thing that you're explaining with Louis Armstrong being able to sit, and then the music kind of finding the people at a central point. But I think then you touched on where I was going, which was, we need to understand that as not only a musical ability, but an intellectual ability, a complexity of the mind
yeah,
to be able to
yeah.
really
And before you
hold
continue,
together complex forms.
as a Pan-Africanist, I'm not bragging, but these bases of intellectuality and stuff are cultural. It's not genetics, it's cultural, but it started in the mind of Africa before the Europeans came and blew everything away, blew everything in Timbuktu and Congo. We have, and what you were seeing with what we're doing now cerebrally is part of the tradition of where we've been led. Second, I would mention places like India. So we continue with what you're going with the intellectual
Yeah,
part. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, man. I mean, the conversation is really in sync in terms of, then it could also be partly genetics, right? To say intellect is not only that which lives in the mind, but there's also bodily intellect
In the cells, yeah.
yeah. So it's like, what things, what impulses are you born having within your body that make it easier for you to adapt? Because even if
Yeah.
you were to use the American, or not, rather the European kind of framework of understanding evolution as an adaptability, there's a certain level of capability you need to have to be able to adapt to particular
Yeah.
situations.
So
That's
here's
why
what I
our
would
hands,
say. So
what.
here's what I
Yeah,
would say. I would say that
sure.
Africans, this is going to sound racist, but we are genetically predisposed towards cerebral and intellectual stuff, not because we have an inherent thing, but because our ancestors have been doing it for thousands of years and have mutated it into the cell work. But it's not genetic, it's not at the level of genotype, it's phenotype also. But there's been chemical changes. So what I'm doing is explaining that every human being in the world comes from the same source, but the work that your parents do affects your genetic makeup and your mind later on. So what I'm saying is that we have been doing divination, we've been doing music, we've been doing mathematics, we've been doing it for thousands, millions, now hundreds and thousands of years, and that leads to chemical changes in the individual and their child. So I think that we're linking now, and that would be my way of responding to the European. What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, man, no, absolutely. I think we're speaking one language, and I guess it's all a matter of knowing how to articulate it. But I suppose it's the same thing that is done by Europeans, because there's this weird insistence or kind of suggestion, as if because a lot of the foundational fine art foundations as we know them were
Or
started
so
in.
they think, or so they think,
Yeah,
but continue.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess no, but I'll say fine art very particular, because I think fine art in and of itself becomes a construct that is very
Yeah.
European, that
But
starts
very
doing.
quickly, you know that within because I'm against empire, within Kemet or Egypt, when they became royal, they had those things before Europe had it. Those
No,
fine, refined,
I feel you,
and
but it's like
classical music.
we didn't think of it as fine art. I think
Yeah,
when it becomes fine art and it falls into the realm
yeah,
of humanities, it starts performing differently, right?
yeah,
It is done like that for particular outcomes that aren't available or that were not the intention. When we do art, we do it from a place of spirit, right?
yeah.
What fine art is doesn't consider spirit, right? It
It
becomes
doesn't. It
something
doesn't.
different. So if
It
we're
doesn't.
thinking what is this, modernism, postmodernism, none of those things really centered
They don't
spirit.
even exist. Yeah.
There's my chat. So it's like, if then we are trying to unpack things from that level of saying, okay, so this is how these people got to run this thing. Right now in the world, there is an understanding, or rather an insistence from white scholars, white writers, white critics, that kind of perpetuates the idea as if art is something they got genetically. So it's like when you're art, when you are white, you just understand art. White people, it's like the
Hey,
skin color is an
Rez,
man.
and when you're black, you just understand the blues. Let me stop.
You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, you just understand basketball or whatever it is, right? But
Yeah,
it's like if we were
it's
to use
practice, and
yeah, if
ritual.
we were
Yeah,
to use that framing that they use to say, then it means that the things that we are proficient in also we are genetically predisposed, right? It's because of the work that was being done by our ancestors, right?
that's why I call it practice. Yeah.
Yeah, within communal spaces, within ritual spaces, singing, that is what gives us a natural inclination to know how to get the kind of aesthetic features to the music that we were making, that we want, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what Zims' practice was concerned about. I think he
Yes.
understood, and he understood that ingoma goes beyond what he's doing on stage, right? Music and the song that gives birth to him goes beyond jazz, but jazz becomes the kind of grammar that he's attracted to. However, the
Yeah.
language he's communicating becomes a very ancient dialect that precedes
Yeah.
even what we call classical.
And to go to another level, so a lot of people, even me, I could be a jazz snob or a classical music slob or whatever. And sometimes we look down on hip hop. But on my last show, I was talking to Brian Roy, who's a hip hop guy, and I said, hip hop young men. Some of them are not spiritual. Some of them are. It depends on how you use the idiom. And it goes back to what you're saying is that you're using the language. The language is the means to everything. And I was letting people know that hip hop, no matter what part of the world you are in, it's the language of young Black men and women today. And it is just as valid as a medium to spirituality as any. It depends on how you use it. Continue. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And I look at hip hop and like the kind of influence it had on us, even as South Africans. I mean, it was quite fascinating for me as a teenager growing up in South Africa to understand, because the one thing that was very clear within old school hip hop that is lost within new school is that we always knew hip hop was a culture. This is the one thing that people like KRS-One and all the greats ingrained in us. We knew that
KRS-One and my other guy is Chuck D. Those are my favorites.
Yeah, man, we
Chuck
knew
D.
what we were involved in or what we were fascinated with was more than just a musical code. Like
No. It was
a
a cry of liberation and defiance and
man,
other
and
things
it
too.
was like it
And
becomes a
complexity.
universal kind of voice if we're thinking about it through the lens of a language for the youth. Then it makes sense how South Africans find resonance within this music and they find their own versions. It kind of gives birth to different revolutions around the world.
Yeah.
But I think the critical thing becomes the fact that as we engaged with it as children, we always knew that hip hop was not just a music genre. And I wonder
No. In fact, I didn't think of it as a genre. I thought of it as flow. I grew up when I was 6 or 7 years old. I heard Roxanne, people battling each other, Roxanne. It was actually it was engagement of all your senses, your feelings, your cerebral. Like, oh, look at what he said. Look what you never thought. Oh, this is a style. It was a culture, and it was an immediate experience. So continue. Sorry, it's the critics. It's the critics who isolate things. Oh, this is hip hop clothing. No. Hip hop was actually music that was meant to stop violence in New York, where they made gangs battle each other through dancing rather than fighting. Continue.
Yeah, man. And I suppose hip hop becomes a continuation of the spirit of improvisation because I mean, you see videos. I think there's a documentary called The Art of Freestyle. And one of the people there kind of speaks back to the birth of hip hop, thinking about how instruments were taken out of schools, right? Live music instruments. So you think about America as this quote unquote birthplace for jazz, as we know it in the contemporary world, right? That's the first thing.
I will say that America was the birthplace for modern pop music.
No, but the second thing that happens is that then the government within America removes the instruments from the public schools, right? So the people that innately are good at jazz are now not being trained at a young level. And
but they're good at hip hop.
Yeah, man. And then
very quickly, continue your thought, but very quickly, when very quickly
becomes the improvisation. I don't want to lose this. Hip hop becomes improvisation because it works with what is accessible. It says the old record that exists within my mother's household with this drum machine becomes a whole new song. I take a segment of it, which I then loop to recreate something completely new. And that becomes an interesting way to think about the functionality of hip hop on a broader scale. How are we taking the little bits that we can get, sampling it to make something quite bigger? Yes.
Okay. So here's the point I was making. When slaves came to the US, the slave owners took away their drums because drums make you too combatant. That's why, so African music is drum. So they started clapping, doing other things. And so that's what led to the blues. So the point you're making is that you can take away the drum, but you can't take away that actual accent and rhythm. Because what you will do is you will start to use your body to mimic what the drum does. And that's what hip hop continuing. Yeah, continue. That's all I was gonna say. Yeah.
No, man, and you spot on. I think we're understanding each other from a very interesting level, because in
Yeah.
essence, what we are saying is that what lives within us and the thing that we try to express cannot be killed, right? And it cannot be limited due to the accessibility or inaccessibility of particular
No,
tools.
no.
If it can't find the tools, you yourself become the tool. And I think this is what Zim was trapped in. And that's why
Yeah.
in a lot of his songs, you even hear him put down the saxophone. You hear him use his actual throat
Yes,
to
yes.
enunciate and create sounds that go beyond what
Yeah.
the instruments can do.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, it's this contestation, it's this kind of work that he was putting in that really suggests who he is. But I guess as a broader thing, and like maybe a closing on Zim, I'd like to say, for me, Zim's legacy is truly then experienced and expressed through who he left behind, right? So we look at people like Nduduzo Makhathini, who now has like a budding career. In fact,
Whose name I messed up last time? I said Yakathini. It's Makathini.
oh,
Sorry.
Makhathini, yeah.
Yeah.
A flourishing career, signed to Blue Notes. But I mean, this guy's first gigs was with Zim. Zim found a bunch of
Yeah.
young students that he said he wants to play with. It was him, it was Shane Cooper, and Ayanda Sekate, right?
Yeah.
And those guys have grown to become like quite fascinating musicians. But I look at the work of Nduduzo and how it's really rooted in a form of a Black cosmology, in a form of Black ontology, and really
Wait, so
trying
the
to
jazz musician Nduduzo, what's his last name?
Makhathini.
Yeah. The pianist, yeah. And it's funny because I didn't know that he trained under Zim, but I was saying in my other show that it's clear that he is influenced by Zim, and I felt embarrassed because I said something that I can't prove. You get my point? I didn't want him to watch it one day and say, "What is this guy talking about? He doesn't know what he's talking about." But
No,
continue.
man.
Sorry.
I mean, he speaks. I mean, if you watch his own interviews, he has a few where he speaks quite publicly about the influence Zim had on his life
Yeah,
and how Zim challenged what they understood music to be. And he
yeah,
doesn't only speak about Zim, he also speaks about Begum Seleko, right? Who
yeah.
was a
Msaleko was even before them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, man. And I mean, you think about the story of Mseleko and Makhathini. When Makhathini went to Mseleko wanting to learn how to play the piano, the proposition that was put forth by Mseleko was that he needed to drop out of school. Mseleko was like, I'm
Can I
not
say
going
one
to
thing?
win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to win trying to impart into you what I know when the institution is
Yeah.
removing that, putting
Well, you know
something
what I
else. So
thought?
you must choose. Yeah, yeah.
So here's what I thought. When I listen to really good jazz music, when you listen to the piano or the guitar or the drum, it actually sounds like the same instrument. It's all about the dynamics and the articulation. So what I'm saying, each instrument start. So it's funny, like I want to learn how to play piano, but Nsaleko could play piano, saxophone. He could play any instrument, and I don't think he saw any distinction between the instruments. Continue.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Because it becomes that thing where it's not about the instrument, but the song within him.
And the
And these
sound. Yeah.
yeah, man, these things become but only portals through which we get to hear the amplification of what he's
Yeah.
trying to express. But he becomes the actual instrument. His heart, his spirit becomes the actual music that we're trying to
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
And I think with Makhathini, man, what I'm trying to get to is that, I mean, where he is now, he just dropped a single called Nomkhubulwane. And Nomkhubulwane is a deity that exists within the Zulu culture that one of the Zulu scholars by the name of Mazisi Kunene wrote quite extensively about. But what I'm trying to get at is that there's then a very deep philosophical nature again being embedded in the music, things that Zim was trying to do. But I guess we were not in an era of social media. We were not in an era where listening to jazz was cool or thinking of jazz
Yeah.
musicians as philosophers was even a thing. But I think because of the seeds that he ensured he planted, when we look at how South African jazz is articulating itself within the world, you do see fruits of the kind of freedom that he fought for within his own music and practice being lived out fully by
I
those
can
that
see it.
come.
And so what I'm seeing with what you're talking about, a true activist who strangely enough, this sounds terrible. Maybe music was just one tool for him. It was way beyond what he wanted to do. It sounds bad for people who want to be pure artists. Like I want to be like, no, for Zim, it's all about the music for you. But for him, he might have been so impersonal, which is what spirits are. Spirits are not really sentimental. Whatever is the instrument is what you use. So there's 2 points I want to add to what you were saying about formal music. So Bach Bach is one of my favorite European musicians, but Bach uses structured languages and systems. But when he reaches the end of the song, he breaks free from them. So he starts off with computation, and then after a while he gets looser and looser, and then he breaks free within a system that's calculated. So that gives to me the point that freedom can only make sense if it's in reference to imprisonment and other things, which is why maybe Zim went to that formal system of jazz, but he thinks way beyond it. Coltrane also, and I see parallels between Zim and Coltrane. Coltrane started off with hot music, R&B, blues, going around the Black community. Same thing, Jimi Hendrix. They started off working the R&B session. Then they started doing jazz or funk. Then at the end of the day, what they're doing is way beyond. And when I hear Makathini, his music has gone actually looser than Zims. What I mean, he's gone further into the spiritual territory. But you have to remember, he's a progeny of Zim, which goes back to the European statement, standing on the shoulders of giants. So even Coltrane stands. Charlie Parker came before Coltrane, but Coltrane sounds more spiritual than Charlie Parker. But it doesn't mean that he's more spiritual. It means that the progression of the Black person from slavery has gone further. Even in South Africa, a lot of what we call traditional South African music is music from the 50s and 60s, which is based on not bebop, or on some sort of like boogie woogie music you hear in America. You get my point. But as the music goes on further, it stretches out. One last thing I want to say, you said that where Zim started using his throat, there's a scene before Coltrane dies where he throws his saxophone to the ground and starts roaring because he said, I'm tired of this fucking instrument. There's nothing I can say on it anymore. This was 2 or 3 weeks before he died from cancer, his last recording. He threw the saxophone on the ground because it wasn't saying what he wanted to say, and he beat his chest and he started yelling. I don't know if you've ever heard that story. I'll send you the quote for it. That sounds eerily sort of like the experience that maybe Zim was going through, where you totally want to break free. I also want to name one more artist, Albert Ayler, who Coltrane used to listen to. Ayler is a very free spirit from the beginning. What do you think?
Yeah, man. I find what you're saying quite fascinating regarding Coltrane's I guess eventual feeling fed up with the actual instrument. Because I think it suggests what we've been trying to say, that these things become but only vessels for the bigger message that these spirits carry, right? The task, the work that these spirits want to carry out within this world cannot be captured within a jazz lens. And I mean, within Coltrane's life, he's traveled to the Middle East and how that
India.
Yeah, man, you get to hear that it was a genuine search for self. And the best way to record I guess moments within the search is best expressed through music, but music doesn't become the actual thing. But I guess as a bigger thing that I want to say, and like as a closing note, is that what we fail as Africans, and I'm going to say Africans because I think Americans are much better, is that we fail at making connections and like really segmenting periods of time as noteworthy. So it's like in the same way where there would be like a Renaissance period and whatnot. I think there are very key moments within the South African music and jazz development that need to kind of be termed. And within that, people like Makathini and all the new people do not become like, I guess, these haphazard occurrences. We are able to contextualize them because we are able to look at the history of South African music and say, but if you notice within this era, this is what was happening. And then within this era, Zim came and this is what he was doing. And if we look at Busim Mhlongo and we look at so and so, we eventually get to Makathini with such a comprehensive understanding because he is not a silo. He doesn't become an existence that becomes an exception, but he becomes an affirmation of a bigger collective. He becomes an affirmation of people who create from a particular space. And all the language is doing is finding a much more nuanced vocabulary, but it has always been there.
It's more common. And it's funny because you say Renaissance, same thing as reawakening, being born or being, it's just and here's what we're going to say. What we're doing right now is part of what you say we need to do, where we need to mark points in history. And I'm going on record following your cue to say this is also a reawakening for South Africa, for Nigeria, for Compton, for Chicago, for Mogadishu, for any part of the world. This is where the reawakening begins because it's just a reawakening. We've always been who we are, but we've been through lenses. When you go back to the first jazz music in America, it was in whorehouses and stuff. Louis Armstrong's mother was a prostitute and he's playing jazz music, but the spirit is there, but it finally broke through with Coltrane. And same thing with Zim. Zim is taking South Africa from a post-apartheid era to the first early eras, and guys like Makatini now are pushing it further. But the question is, we have to keep the momentum or it will die out. Sorry, I'll let you end now. Thank you.
No, that's cool, man. I think it's definitely about the momentum, but I think also what we're saying here is that the cerebral work and the work of writing and the work of contextualizing becomes as important as the creating. Because
Yes,
as Zims is making these
yeah.
moves, he's not thinking about a trajectory or tradition. It is us, the people who are
It's our
observing.
job. Yeah. And so this is where it goes back to you, where you're an artist, but you're also a thinker. You have to be both to be able to contextualize it and be what I would call the critic.
Word.
Yeah, I would.
Word. Yeah,
Thank
man.
you.
So I think what we're doing is that we're starting to articulate these things in a way that shows that they are connected, right? They're not haphazard, they're not random.
So in other words, we're the modern day Egyptian priests. We're priests.
Absolutely,
I'm
man.
serious. We are
Together.
priests. Yeah.
Yeah, man, we're really preaching the word of something that is bigger than us. And I think as far as jazz goes, as far as South African jazz goes, there's so much to be mined there. There's so much of a chosen illegibility that speaks to a fight for freedom, a fight for an articulation that does not merely box me into
and you know
something.
what? I'm angry at you now because that was what we were supposed to talk about today, the illegibility part, where they go into the illegibility. But that's a good thing for us to talk about next time. That was actually what we were going to talk about, illegibility. But it's good because we've done the groundwork for it today.
Yeah.
But
so I think,
hold that quickly surmise your illegibility theory, and we'll talk about it more. Okay, yeah. You're talking about when Zim started getting, I think it's kind of like what I said with Coltrane, where he threw his saxophone on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I think just to sum it up here, but it's something that we can dive into. It's just the moment where Black bodies realize that the fundamental tools that are provided and the languages that are available to us become incompetent and inadequate,
and insufficient,
allowing a full expression of who we are. So it's like the breath of our spirit cannot really be articulated through the limitations that are jazz music, that are poetry, that is photography, that is painting, but we will never stop trying, right? Because this is how we also theorize and write ourselves into the world.
And also, I think those are starting places because you need to have some structure. They're starting places,
so
but the final place is freedom.
That's it, man. So like
Long Road to Freedom by Zim. Long Road to Freedom. Long March to Freedom.
You know, man. So it's like we start having reference points, right? But the thing that we're doing actually becomes bigger than the reference point itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, in a nutshell. Yeah.
No, look, we can talk for 10 hours. And let me say something. This is the greatest cerebral experience I've had. We are in sync and we don't need to take notes. Thank you very much. I'm very honored. So we'll try to meet up later on in the week. So what are you going to do today in Josie? You're going to have fun, go out in the sun?
Yeah, man. I'm trying to fight with my master's paper. So it's a little bit of
fight with it. No wonder sometimes you're not accessible. But that's a good thing because you're working hard. Like I said, it's 5 in the morning and I have to go to work. But we're here for Africa and we're here to give a musical offering to Zim. And we have to honor his life. I don't want to cry today. I'll cry after I go off. Thank you very much. Love you very much.
I appreciate this moment
so much. Have a good day.
Very important work, man. And I hope that we continue having this very important conversation.
We'll continue until I stop breathing in this world. Love you. Have a good one. So we'll see you later.
What's up, man? Blessings.